What is the most difficult achievement in Hades? Well, Steam provides a list of achievements, and at the very bottom we see the ones that the fewest players have completed. Now these ones aren't too difficult and can be gotten by adapting a slow and cautious playstyle. For the absolute most difficult feat, we have to look into this last achievement. This achievement is fourth from the bottom and it leads to quite an important part of Hades. But before that, we have to understand what the role of heat is in the Hades run. After conquering the 4 stages and defeating Hades once, the player unlocks the Pact of Punishment. This pact allows you to add conditions to the game to make the enemy stronger or the game harder for yourself. The use of heat is to provide the player with a way of grinding out materials and use for upgrading equipment, but more importantly, it allows players to make the game so much more challenging. These statues next to the training area, which seem to resemble a very familiar skeleton, can be unlocked by defeating Hades at different levels of heat. To get Skelly's second prize for the achievement, only a 16 heat run is needed. To get all of Skelly's prizes, you will need to beat the game at 8, 16 and 32 heat. Here are some of my own attempts at 32 heat, and the loadout that I used. It was done with the gloves because I enjoyed playing with them. For me, this took 44 attempts, but for you it might take less. When it comes to these runs with higher amounts of heat, luck will be a big factor in whether you can complete it or not. It's just that for a more skilled player, you need to rely less on luck for a successful run. On speedrun.com, there are categories in which people race at 32, 40 and even 50 heat. Many people would be lucky to even get one 50 heat run completed, and there are people out there speedrunning it. For a good portion of the player base, being able to change the game and up the difficulty makes it so much more replayable and satisfying, especially extreme measures. One of the Pact of Punishment conditions that gives the bosses additional abilities and tight deadline, which restricts how long you have to complete each stage, where normally there isn't a time limit at all. With these alterations, players are forced to come up with better strategies and techniques to beat the game. But that's not even where this ends. If you go into the Pact of Punishment and max out all of the conditions, you will end up with 63 heat. And that certainly sounds quite difficult, but let me just run through what 63 heat really does. All of the enemies are buffed. Increased damage, HP, movement speed, attack speed, 2 extra perks, and they block the first 2 hits. There are more enemies. Mirror of Night is deactivated. You only have one choice when picking boons. You also have to purge one before leaving each stage. You can't heal any HP. Only have 5 minutes for each stage. All shopping prices are more expensive. All traps deal more damage, and all bosses have extra abilities. Up until now, I've talked about how you can make the game more challenging for yourself, but I haven't talked about the different difficulties. When you make a fresh save file, you can pick between normal mode and hell mode. Now if you pick normal mode, you get what I've been describing so far, but if you pick hell mode, the game is a little bit different. When you select hell mode, you unlock the Pact of Punishment from the very start, and in fact you can't turn it off. In hard mode, you have to play with a minimum of 5 heat. You will always have a point in hard labor, lasting consequences, jury summons, calisthenics program, and personal liability. This condition makes it so that your invincibility frames are removed. Those are the fractions of a second after your character gets hit, making it so that you can only take damage from one thing at a time. And with those removed, it makes it very easy to get swarmed by attacks and die. Is this even possible to beat? Well, sort of. Before I go on, all of the runs that I'm going to talk about will be modded. A modded run means to force the RNG of a run to be more consistent, especially when it comes to runs being made on higher heat levels. The main reason for this is that speed runs or just high heat runs are very much dependent on luck, from the boons to the hammers you can get to the various chambers that you encounter. These mods aren't meant to make the game easier, but they will save time and reduce the amount of resets a player will need for a successful run. There are a lot of mods, but there are 3 main things that they need to do. Firstly, it makes the first boon and hammer you get not affected by RNG, so you will always get the same one when you start a run. The reason for this is pretty simple. If you start a run and the first boon you get is bad, then you can just reset and start again. So mods are used to make the runs more convenient for the player. It's important to note that any other boons you get will be random. Secondly, in the last stage just before fighting Hades, you have to search for the Satyr Sack, and that spawns in 1 of 5 chambers. But it cannot spawn in the first one, so the mods guarantee that the sack spawns in the second chamber. It doesn't affect the outcome of the run at that point, as it's at the very end of the run and most of the RNG based elements have already been dealt with, and getting bad RNG at this point, where the sack spawns in the very last chamber, could waste a bunch of time and ruin a run. Lastly, there are mini bosses that you can fight throughout the 4 stages, Asterius by himself in Elysium, and the upgraded enemies in the Temple of Styx. These, as well as the Barge of Death encounter in Asphodel, are all removed by the mods as they take up too much time. A big part of completing these difficult runs is playing and resetting until you reach one that has good enough luck to win with. Hades had its full release in September of 2020, and it was only in December of that year that an unseeded 60 heat run was completed and uploaded to YouTube by Tailesque. Their run was completed using the bow as it provided higher damage and allowed the player to stay a fair distance away from the enemies. Then it was almost a year later in September of 2021 that an unseeded 62 heat was completed by YKC and uploaded to Bilibili, a Chinese video platform. By this time, players had switched to a Zeus shield, as using a shield allowed you to block damage, which was crucial as you were unable to heal in the entire run, and using a Zeus aspect also gave a good balance of damage. Now, it's absolutely incredible that a 62 heat run is even possible, but in the comments of YKC's video, they included a very important piece of information. They say that the difference between beating a 62 and 64 heat run is the last 2 points of heat in routine inspection. This is because despite all the other conditions of the Pact of Punishment, the last tier of routine inspection determines whether or not you are able to use Stubborn Defiance, which gives you 1 extra life that resets when you enter a new room. The extra life gives you so much leeway when it comes to beating the game without any healing and against buffed up foes. But this just reinforces how difficult a 64 heat run is. You cannot make any mistakes. At the time of making this video, the only recording of this run is a re-upload, but I was able to find a post all the way back in March of 2021. And that is the legendary routed 64 heat run done by Badge. Using mods, a player can play the same run over and over so they know exactly what to expect, by knowing which chambers and boons to pick. Again, at 64 heat there is no room for mistakes, and up to this point this was the only time a 64 heat had ever been beaten. And that is where the record sat for a while, an unseeded 62 heat run and a routed 64 heat. Except last month, 22nd of July 2023, Hades high heat player Jade uploaded something truly incredible, modded but unseeded 64 heat run beaten with the aspect of Zeus in 19 minutes and 41 seconds. This is the most difficult achievement in Hades. There is pretty much nothing above this, as the only improvement would be to make it unmodded, but that only affects some of the luck a player has to deal with. There is plenty of talent in the Hades community, and many people like Badge and Jade are very capable of beating Hades at its most challenging. So doing unmodded runs would mostly be a waste of anyone's time. Jade's run was completed with mods, and it would have taken thousands upon thousands of attempts if it was done without. I can't even begin to guess how many tries you would need to get a seed good enough for an unmodded 64 heat clear. I hope this video makes you want to play Hades, and maybe attempt some high heat runs yourself. But I also hope it gets everyone excited for the sequel that is going into early access sometime towards the end of this year. Thank you for watching.